Hi, okay, so we're back with the camera projection that we were doing earlier. So right now, we've been placing one card into the scene to create the floor. I'm just going to move this slightly further down, just till it sort of reaches that end wall. There we go. And you can see it's not fully hitting the edges, at least not on this side. So I might just look at adjusting that slightly. Now I could just bring that down a bit. Like that seems to sit a little bit better to me. And I think it needs a minor adjustment in regards to rotation, and then after which we'll look at increasing its scale again. There we go. So that now feels like that's quite well. I think that's sort of see where the floor is. You can see obviously there's issues where there isn't just a floor, there's pillars sticking out or things like that. In this case, that won't be too big a problem because luckily they're quite far back, so it shouldn't sort of be too obvious that it's projecting onto the floor rather than onto a actual card that's sticking out. You can have scenes where you could literally have another piece of card sticking out in order to replicate that sort of pillar or so on, but I think we'll be fine, like I said, given its distance. Just slightly bigger, there we go. Okay, and I will just pull this across a smidgen. Okay, and I think it just needs to go down again a little bit more. Right, okay, so there we go. And that is kind of our floor done. Okay, so what we can then do once we've got that, by the way, if we're going to start to put a wall and so on up, but if we just jump back to our 2D view for a second, so if we have a look at that as well now, we can see the camera is pointed sort of this way. Yeah, looking there, and you can see the floors kind of running off slightly to the left. That should start to resemble what this scene was like. So the camera was actually looking more towards this corner, and so you can see the floor is off to the left of that. The camera is not really facing down the corridor itself. It's like I said, the camera's pointed more to the right, and you can see that's kind of what we're ending up with here on our scene, and that's basically what we should have when we finish. Basically a recreation of that corridor in 3D space and the camera's position. So what we'll do is we're going to add another one in. Now, what you can do as well, by the way, because I find as you start to add more of these in, it can start to get a bit confusing as to which one's which. So I'm going to double click the card to bring up the card details here, and I'm just going to go into the node tab, and I've got a label, and I'm just going to type in floor. Okay, if I do that, it should say floor underneath, and that just helps a little bit with remembering which one's which later on. Now, rather than creating a new card and a grid again, I'm just going to highlight both of these, press Control C and Control V. So just copied and pasted that. I'm going to connect that up, and we've got another one in the same place. Double click the second card that we just put in. Let's just change its name so we don't get mixed up. We'll call this one right wall. And what we can do as well is, sorry, if we go back into the card properties here, we can right click. So you can do this with any node. Anytime you've made any changes, you can right click in an empty space in the properties, and you can say set knobs to default, and that will put it back to its default properties. Okay, so that other card now should be back. Let's have a look in 3D space. There we are. So you can see it's kind of jumped back to its default properties, which was again at the same starting position as the camera, which is why the camera can't see it right now. So let's pull that out. And okay, so we're going to make the wall now. So it's always a good idea, once you've got the floor correctly positioned, anything else that you add, it's better to work off that floor rather than just, so I wouldn't, rather than going in and trying to do the ceiling now, or do this wall on the right here, which isn't really touching the floor in this picture. It's better to do probably the wall on the left or the right, because they're connected to the floor. So we'll start with the right wall. And by the way, I don't have to use separate grid nodes. I could just use one grid node. Every card could be connected to the same one to have the grid in there. The reason I like to use separate grids is because if I double click the grid node as well, I can go into a color tab on it, and if I click this little color wheel that you can see there, you can just bring down one of the red, green, or the blues. for example, just to give it a slightly different color. That can help sometimes to distinguish separate cards from each other as well. Okay, so we'll click that, and so first thing we need to do is adjust its rotation. So I've already had a try with this earlier. I was doing it, and oops, wrong one, but I think it was about minus sort of 70. Seemed to work quite well for this. So I think it was 72 actually. Well, it depends, because this is a slightly different setup, but we'll make some adjustments in a bit. So the thing is as well, by the way, when I was doing that, from this angle, that kind of looks like they're in the right place, but I always find it's a good idea to sort of move around in 3D space, and you can really get a good idea if that's happening or not. And you can see it's not matching up at all at this moment. So we have to kind of move in a bit, and now you can see it's not even on the edge of that card. So I do find, like I said, in 3D space, you really need to kind of just move around. You can see what I mean about the card isn't angled correctly just yet. So let's try that. That's starting to get a bit better. Now, obviously we don't just want to work in 3D space, but I'll show you what we're trying to do. So if we jump back into 2D, hopefully that should start to line up with where the wall is. Okay, so what we're going to do, similar thing, adjust its scale. So let's give that a really wrong property. Let's adjust the scale here, so that's quite long as well now. Okay, so that should hopefully run along the wall, possibly a little bit too long, so let's make it a bit shorter for now. Probably needs to be even shorter still. Right, so let's jump back into 3D view, double click that, and I'm just going to move that along a bit. Okay, and let's have a quick look in 2D view now. Right, okay, so that needs to come along. Here we go. So at this point, so if I can adjust that Y. Yeah, I always find it difficult to do it like by trying to pull the arrows, the axes arrows in here. And I think because we rotated it, if I try to move this, if you can see that on the translate properties, it's X and Y are being adjusted, so it can be slightly difficult to even do it by adjusting those numbers now. But it's not too big a deal, because like I said, you can just switch between the two views. Just use your tab key and move through. And there we go, that's pretty much, so I want it to line up against that. It's almost there, it just needs maybe a slight adjustment back. That's great. Okay, so I've got that. Let's have a quick look at where that's going to. And again, you can see it's running alongside that, which is great. Now, it looks like it's run over a little bit. That shouldn't be too big a deal. And again, we're so far back there, I don't think that'll be too much of a problem. When you're doing this, by the way, if it comes down to a case of either having cards overlap or just leave a slight gap, have them overlap. Okay, because when we project, if you remember from the first example video, you can only project where there's a card. So even if you have the tiniest gap, if there's a space there, you'll see nothing when you're projecting. You'll just show us as black, so the illusion doesn't work. So whereas if you overlap a little bit, it's not too big a deal. It'll just sort of project onto whichever card's more forward. So yeah, so when you're doing this, if better to err on the side of caution and just have them overlap a little bit. It's not a big deal. That sort of works a bit better. So we've got to adjust its scale, so we'll adjust that up a bit. Let's see. There we go, and you can see it's kind of there, a little bit short, so I'll just sort of turn it up. So I'm going to just, there we go, a little bit there. Okay, so that I'm kind of happy with. I say that actually, maybe it is better just to do it this way. It doesn't really matter that it's going down, but tell you what, let's just pull that up a bit and just keep it a little bit cleaner. There we go. So again, like I said, I am going to let that go down just a bit so it can overlap. 2.2, let's try. So sometimes you can see I do a combination. Sometimes I'm using the mouse to slightly adjust the numbers, and sometimes I'm just typing them in. It's just whichever feels easiest at the time. So if you jump back to our 3D view, hopefully what we're starting to see now, so we've got the corridor floor and we've got the wall. Now it might be easier at this point, just when we copy and paste these in, okay, is to actually just do the left wall. So we'll go back into the node and I will just change the name so I can remember that one as well. Okay, to left wall. because then we can just pull that one along, and hopefully that shouldn't then need too many more changes. So if we jump back in, and again if we want to we could give it a different color, but I think it'll be fine. Now by the way, there are quite clearly gaps here, and again like that's something we want to avoid. So we'll just sort of pull that down a bit, and I'm purposefully letting it go just through the wall floors slightly. And again, it's that deciding where that end line is, and I'd say it's probably about there. So that probably needs to come down a bit. Okay, probably not that much though. There we go. And so there we go. Okay, so there. I'll leave it at that. I think it will need. No, let's just pull it up a bit. I think it needs to go slightly more. So a lot of it really at this point is now just making little changes. There we go. So I'll align that up. So we've got that there. And I just wanted to show you this again. Like I said, so I'll keep jumping back to 3D view, and you can see we are building that corridor, and we're going to project the image onto this later. Notice, by the way, as well, even though when we look at this in 2D, you can see that in a sense it kind of looks like everything's kind of converging into a central point, doesn't it? That kind of makes sense. But when we create in 3D, we don't do that. The cards, when you actually look at it in 3D space, the reason the cards are also looking like they're sort of moving off into the distance is because they're true 3D objects, and so as they move further away from this camera, they get smaller. Not because we're kind of pulling them in, if that kind of makes sense. So just something to bear in mind. And what we'll do then is, so I'll finish off with this other one. So I've only got these are all generally 15-minute tutorials, so for that reason I don't think I'll finish the whole scene with this, but I'll do one more, and hopefully that'll kind of give you an idea of how this should work, and then you can sort of finish off the rest yourself. So we'll go in, and this time we'll say front right, or just call it front wall actually. That'll do. And again, what I'll do with this one is right click and set to default. There we go, and we've got our default card. Oops, just moved my camera by mistake. There we go, got the. And notice, by the way, whenever I start, I always like to start in the 3D view, because again, like I said, I know where these things are. So remember, we were doing it as connections, yeah. So we were connecting each thing up. So I know that this should at least connect up to this wall. Okay, so that's where I want this to be in 3D space. If you're just working in 2D, I find sometimes it can look in the 2D view like something's in the right place, and then you look at it in 3D and it could be too far back or so on. It's not actually where it needs to be. So I find it is useful just to start off and get the cards just sort of sorted in here first if you can, and then once you've got that, you can do the rest. And again, we can go in now, go into the grid, go into the color node. Let's just pull that down, give that a slightly different color. So like I said, the grid does nothing more than just let us sort of distinguish the cards. If you want to, you can keep them all white. It makes no difference really. If you can tell where they are anyway. It's just preference. Okay. So I think that's kind of there. Looks about right. There we go. Okay, and so then again, like I said, it's just about scaling that. Scale that up. To be honest, we could do that in the 2D view. Doesn't matter again that it's actually quite a lot larger and out of the frame. But yeah, that's another bit put together. So the only things left now are the back wall and the ceiling. I'll come back in a final tutorial now where we'll put this all together. I would suggest that you try the ceiling and the back wall yourself, and I'll see you in tutorial 3.